Hey folks, a few weeks back I introduced my new video cast with a small, short introduction, and so today I want to continue with that. Consider this introduction part 2. Today I'm going to be talking about suicide. Yeah, suicide. Stick around. You're with the Punk Theologian, and this is At the Edge of the Roof. Hey folks, welcome back. This is your Punk Theologian at the Edge of the Roof. Today our topic is suicide, and I know this is difficult for some of us to talk about. Some of us have had varying experiences with suicide, and since it is Suicide Awareness Month, and Monday was Suicide Prevention Day, I wanted to talk a little bit about suicide on a personal level, suicide from my own experience. And I can't help but, reflect on the recent passing of Jared Wilson, who was a pastor at Harvest Christian Fellowship with executive pastor Greg Laurie, who back in the day came from Calvary Chapel. Before he started the Harvest Crusade and Harvest Ministries. Jared Wilson was a young pastor with Greg Laurie there at Harvest Christian Fellowship. He was young, vibrant. I think he was just into his 30s. He had a wife and 2 kids, and he was mostly known publicly for his outspokenness on mental health in the church. He was out and open and outspoken about his own battles with depression, and he was an advocate in the church against stigma. He wrote books. He preached sermons. He had open conversations. He had a blog, and he did a lot to bring awareness, especially in the church, around issues of mental health and mental health disorder. He succumbed to the suicidal ideation that he was open about. He was honest and open about the depression he had, and now he's gone. So I was supposed to speak on a panel that evening. I've also been outspoken about my struggles with mental health disorder, suicidal ideation, substance use disorder, and I think I told you in my previous introduction in this video cast that I have my own struggles with depression and bipolar and suicidal ideation, and the fact that I wanted to be more outspoken about these issues. I wanted to be open and honest about my story, and so I have through social media and through a local health organization. I'm trained to sit on these panels and share my story. And part of my story is about suicide. And I was scheduled to sit on a panel Monday night at a presentation that was put on by NAMI. And if you don't know what NAMI is or the work that NAMI does, you should. So Google them, NAMI. It's a great resource for mental health. They have hotlines and everything. So look up NAMI. It's probably NAMI, NAMI.org. Look them up. Great resource. Pass on the information. And by the time I got home, I opened up my Facebook feed, and it was filled with the story of Jared's suicide, death by suicide. And I was stunned. I know a bit about him, and I know a bit about his work. And I understand the importance of his work, especially with his work in the church. And he comes from a more evangelical denomination. But that's okay. The meaning of his work was and is still important. I didn't know what to think or how to feel about this person who was so outspoken and such an advocate and did so much work through his nonprofit Anthem of Hope, which was meant to raise awareness in the church, did all this work, wrote books, blogs, preached sermons, and I know that that's hard and difficult for a lot of people. I see recent Facebook posts from friends and others in the wider church commenting on his death, and I know there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, there is confusion, and there's outright shock at his death. And I think the shock that somebody like that, who's so immersed in the work of advocacy, how someone like that, and even for me, it was shocking. I mean, I think every time we hear about somebody taking their life, we can't help but be taken back, to be shocked by it. My perspective as a person who lives with suicidal ideation, and I have for a very long time, who's struggled with depression, who is diagnosed bipolar, I know very well what it's like to live on this side of mental illness. I know what it's like for the mind to be plagued by thoughts of one's own death. My own story is one of mental health disorder from a very young age. I can remember feeling different. I can remember being depressed. And I can remember not wanting to be in my body. I can remember always being so dissatisfied with life. Like not wanting to be where I was. Always wanting to be somewhere else. Always felt like that in my life. Never comfortable where I was at. I was always looking for greener pastures. I was always looking for something better. I was always looking to get out of my body, to get out of what I was feeling, wanting to feel different than I felt, wanting to change the way I felt. And so, in my late teens, when I got into drugging and drinking, that was the simple cure for me. It worked. It numbed me. It got me out of all those negative feelings, those depressive feelings. It made me feel different. It helped me handle life. It took me to another level, another place, even if just for a time. But the problem is that, the high ends and you always have to plummet back down to earth. And that plummet to earth over time becomes worse and worse and worse. And so in those plunges to earth, there were always thoughts of suicide, some permanent way of getting out of this thing called life. It's just hard to talk about when you're on this side of it. If you've never felt this before, if you've never experienced this before, and you're looking at it from the outside in, and I totally understand that this doesn't make sense. I totally get it that you can't wrap your mind around it. And that's okay. But to be on this side of it, it makes perfect sense to me. But it's so damn difficult to explain it to someone else. And so I go back to these panels that I sit on, and I sit there, on this panel at this table with a microphone, and I'm looking out across this crowd of folks, and I'm wondering, what in the hell are they doing there? What is their interest in hearing my story? And is this going to make any difference? And so I share my story, and I wonder, Am I just like a monkey in a cage, right? Are people just are they voyeurs, just looking at me through the bars of a cage, um, and are they judging me for that? Are they empathizing with who I am and where I've been? Do they understand my story? And I don't necessarily expect them to understand my story. I don't expect anybody on that side of the issue to understand anything that's going on over here. Because sometimes I don't understand it. Sometimes I'm confused by it. I spent a lot of time thinking these past few days, why is it that I have such a difficult time living? And where does this suicidal ideation come from? What is it born out of? This idea that I don't want to exist. That at times it seems like it would be better not to be here, so then I wouldn't have to live life. When I drank and used, and I drank and used for a very long time, my only purpose in drinking and using drugs was to die. Flat out. I drank because I wanted to die. It's not because I wanted to be the party boy. It's not because I wanted to meet girls. It's not because, I had a great time hanging around the keg with all of my friends. It's not those 40 ounces out in the parking lot and we broke them against the back wall of the club, and then we went in and we thrashed around to punk music and we felt like brothers. It wasn't any of that. It wasn't social. It wasn't. The only reason why I drank, fundamentally, if you want to get right down to it, is it was because I wanted to die. And I didn't know any other way to kill myself. And so for me, it was like a slow suicide. And by the end of my 20s, 28, I overdosed. I overdosed on a concoction of alcohol and drugs. And I don't know why I didn't die. I woke up in the bed and I was alive. Before I went to rehab, I remember going to the liquor store. Before they came to pick me up, I was being shipped off to Metropolitan State Hospital for a year. Went across the street and to the liquor store. It was a busy thoroughfare, and I went to the liquor store to get some beers because I wanted to be loaded when I went there. I wanted to have my last drink. If I was going to go in there and get sober, then I was going to go in loaded. And as I walked out of that liquor store, I distinctly remember walking to the curb, and the thought crossed my mind, I should do this. It's not worth going to rehab. I should do this. And the thought was, I was going to step out into oncoming traffic. And I remember taking that step forward, off the curb. And I can't remember the state of mind that I was in. It was like it was an out-of-body experience. But when I came to or came out of that state, I had not taken a step forward off the curb. I had taken a step back. I can't explain that. I know that God works in my life. I know that God is with me, that God journeys with me through all things. And I do believe in miracles as long as they're grounded, in reality. That's just my theology. I can't say what kept me alive from that overdose. I can't say what kept me from stepping off that curb. I do know what I felt, and I can't explain. I can't help you to understand that. You know, that split second between you're alive and then you're not, and the thought process that goes through that. I wonder about Jared Wilson's thought process, and it actually haunts me, because I think someone who thinks like myself, who has thought a lot about suicide, you know, thinks a lot about these things, right? But if I stick to, my own story at that time in my late 20s, um, wanting to step off that curb, I can say definitely that at that point in my life, there was nothing but darkness. And I think that that's kind of what led me to that moment. I was at a dark place in my life. And it's like looking down a tunnel, that old cliche. I was looking down this dark tunnel, and there was absolutely no light at the end of that tunnel. And I think that was one of the first times in my adult life that I. So, folks, let's take a break here. We'll be back. I'm the punk theologian, and you're at the edge of the roof. Welcome back, folks. I'm the punk theologian. You're at the edge of the roof. I changed my shirt. You probably can tell. I want to end this episode on a positive note, talking about suicide as part of my own story. And I want to end with this message of hope. I wish I could say that time in my late 20s was the end of my struggle with depression and addiction and suicidal thoughts, but it wasn't. I've wrestled with this stuff all through my adult life, into my 40s, where I was finally clinically diagnosed with chronic depression and began to take medication. At first, I was unwilling to speak about that publicly and openly. I kept it private. Didn't know how friends and family would take that. But I will say that once I found a psychiatrist who got my medications dialed in, I felt a whole lot better. It helped the fog lift and create a sense of clear vision. The fog of depression can be so debilitating, and it has been in my own life. But that medication, once dialed in, helped me to function in life. And it even helped with my substance use disorder. There was less reason for me to use alcohol as a way to try to balance this brain of mine that was constantly trying to find this middle ground between a manic high and a depressive low. And so that was my mid 40s, and I kept on that medication, and I was a career educator, but I still had highs and lows, and towards my mid 50s, I experienced um, a low again, a depressive low, and which spiraled into my heavy drinking again as a way to try to cope with that. And then my father passed away, and there was a lot of baggage that I had with him that was never resolved, and that plunged me deeper into depression and into my addiction. And by the beginning of this year, 2019, I found myself back in that place, back in that tunnel, that dark tunnel where there was no light, and I spiraled out of control. I have to be honest. I was an educator. I was a pastor. I was heavily involved in ministry, helping other folks on a weekly basis, but couldn't help myself. Beholden to a congregation um, that I could no longer um, function as a pastor to. Um, and as an educator, having to wake up every day and be present for students. There were days when I couldn't wake up. There were days when I couldn't go into work. There were days when I was too drunk and knew that I couldn't show up to work because I wouldn't show up to work intoxicated. And so I had to stay home and lay in bed, and the depression got worse and worse. April 5th came around, and I drank myself to the edge of death. And I'm open and honest about that today. Today, I am back in recovery. I consider that a significant relapse in the care of my mental health and substance use disorder. And, um, at first I was ashamed of that. Why didn't I have the ability, with all the resources that I have at my disposal, why couldn't I solve this issue? But sometimes, you know, I guess it just goes to show that mental disorder doesn't disappear. It's not cured. It doesn't go away. You don't just take a pill and then you're fine. This is something that I've had to battle with my entire life. And I feel like my entire life has been spent trying to keep this thing balanced. And there are positive ways to do that, and there are negative ways to do that. And when I live into the negative ways of trying to balance this, keep this balanced by drinking and using, it just doesn't work. First of all, alcohol is a depressant. There is no reason why anyone should pour a depressant on top of depression. That just makes it worse. Somehow, the reality of that gets lost in the illusion that somehow I can make myself feel better if I just add this into the equation, and it doesn't. Even on medication prescribed by psychiatrist, you would think that, okay, I take this pill and now I'm better. But that's not always the case. There's always the need to reevaluate and readjust medication. Also, changes, or at least in my case, my mental disorder changes over the course of time, the older I get. And to be honest, at that point in my life over a year ago, I just wasn't paying attention to the warning signs as a pastor, as a community leader. And before I knew it, depression had creeped up and entered the door again, and my medication was off, and I was consumed by depression, unable to leave my bed many days, wanting to sleep, pull the covers over my head, not wanting to participate in life, wanting to avoid the responsibilities of life. And so the drinking got worse. And like I said, by April 5th, I had slowly been trying to drink myself into a place where I wouldn't exist anymore. And on April 5th, I was admitted into the emergency room with a 0.35 alcohol content level, which is near comatose. And there again, I believe that every time I drink, I'm drinking to die. And that's just my form of suicide. And I don't know why I survived that. You know, I blacked out and woke up in an emergency room. I threatened suicide several times while in the emergency room. So they 5150'd me, which basically is giving them the ability to hold me on a 72-hour watch. They put me in the psych ward, and I spent 14 days in a psychiatric hospital where I was reevaluated and while I was detoxed from all the alcohol use. And the psychiatrist who reevaluated me began to ask me questions about the highs and lows in my life, and these manic episodes became very apparent to me and to him. And so he re-diagnosed me with some lower form of bipolar and began to medicate me for that. And I am still on that medication for bipolar, antipsychotic medication that keeps me kind of right in the middle from experiencing those manic highs and those depressive lows, which has really helped me with the cravings for alcohol. I've been clean and sober now almost going on 6 months, and I'm feeling good. I'm feeling hopeful. But I'm aware that depression doesn't disappear. Substance use disorder doesn't disappear and is never cured. It's always there, and it always has to be dealt with. And there is either a positive way to deal with it, or there is a negative way to deal with it. And it's my experience that any time that I've ever tried to deal with it negatively, and by negatively I mean using alcohol as a prescription, it doesn't work. That is a slow recipe for suicide. And why I survived this last experience, again, it's like in my late 20s walking off that curb. What made me call my sister out of the blue on that day and asked her to come and help me. I hadn't spoken with her in a long time, and suddenly I got this urge to call my sister, and I said, please come, I need help. And if she wouldn't have been there, you know, I dare to think what would have happened. I would have most likely died there on the patio in the chair from alcohol poisoning. And I'm alive today. And right now I want to be alive. And I'm living in recovery today, and I'm doing the positive things that I need to do to feel good in my skin, to feel good alive, to want to be alive. And I realize that it's work. It's work. It's work every single day. I'm in a 12-step recovery program. I've got a circle of support around me. I have a psychiatrist and a therapist that I see regularly. I'm on prescription medication for bipolar. And today, for this 24 hours, I am alive and I want to live. And that's hopeful to me. And I hope that it's hopeful for you. I guess what I'm saying is I know what it's like to live on this side of depression, this side of mental illness, this side of addiction, this side of wanting not to exist, struggling with suicidal thoughts. And why someone takes that final step and chooses to die by suicide and goes through with it, and why someone else like myself never gets there, or at least has not got there yet, there's a fine line. And there's no clear answers. And I know we all want that question of why to be answered, but I think that sometimes the question of why, there is no answer to it. It just is what it is. So I think the best that folks on the other side of this, the best that they can do is to continue to listen. And that's why I'm telling my story. All I can say for myself is today I want to live. And today I want to be outspoken. Today I want my life to have meaning. I want to express a message of hope for those of you out there who are struggling in the darkness of depression and bipolar and your addiction. Those who are on the edge of making a choice to live or to die. I want you to know that there are those on this side of it who understand, who are still alive and fighting for you. And there is a way through this. And as a Christian, I think it's important to express this in terms of faith, this hope that I have right now. And you know, through all the experiences that I've had in my life, I kind of gave up on hope, and I kind of gave up on promises, making promises to myself. Because I've experienced so much, and I've resigned myself to the fact that I just have today. I have this 24 hours, and today I want to live. Today I want to stay sober. Today I want to live my life in recovery. Today I want to stay on my medication. Today I want to do the things that I need to do to stay healthy, mentally and physically and spiritually. Today I want to do what I can to pick up that 100-pound phone and call a friend. Today I want to reach out and tell another friend that I love them. I want to stay in contact with a circle of support of friends and family who really know what I'm going through. I want to stay in contact with them. And in all these ways, I think I'm creating a system of hope that I can live into. Because faith, in my understanding, happens in action. And the action of my faith has to be this giant support system that I've created for myself. And when I live into that, I'm living faithfully. And that in turn creates hope for my life. And it's only when I fail to act in faith on this system of support and I turn and I want to hide away, that's when I shut down hope from happening in my life. I cut off hope and I return to that dark tunnel. And when I get to that place, the potential for me taking my own life increases tenfold. And so I want to leave today with this message of hope for any and all who are out there, those who are struggling in their state of mental disorder, addiction disorder, suicidal ideation, and even for those out there who are struggling with the question of why. For those families who've lost loved ones, I want to leave with a message of hope, and I think I'll leave with one of the last tweets that Jared Wilson left before he left us. And these are the words that he wrote. Loving Jesus doesn't always cure suicidal thoughts. Loving Jesus doesn't always cure depression. Loving Jesus doesn't always cure PTSD. Loving Jesus doesn't always cure anxiety. But that doesn't mean Jesus doesn't offer us companionship and comfort. He always does that. And I believe that the God of my faith, the Christ of my faith, is always present and always available as a companion and walks with me through this. And I've given up theologically believing that Jesus can somehow magically cure depression. But I know that faith in Christ can lead to hope that can help me live with it on a daily basis. And that you'll carry that with you just for this day. And choose to live just for this day. I'm the Punk Theologian. Thanks for joining me at the edge of the roof. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.